For centuries, the church called it a sin to profit from money. Yet those same rules built the foundations of modern capitalism. Picture this, a medieval monastery deep in the Italian hills. Candlelight flickers across stone walls. A monk counts gold coins not for greed, but for God. Outside, the poor line up for alms. Inside, parchment ledgers whisper forbidden numbers. Because here, in the house of faith, wealth was both holy and heretical. In the year 1200, to charge interest was to sell time, and time, said the church, belonged only to God. To make money from it was to steal from the divine. And so, every coin that grew by interest was a sin with weight, the kind that might damn a soul forever. But what if banning profit was the first step toward the greatest profit machine ever made? What if the moral walls built to protect purity became the foundations of modern finance? Because behind the sermons and the Latin scripture, there were secret priests who borrowed, bishops who invested, and families who turned faith into finance. Their names are half forgotten now. The Lombards, the Templars, the Medici. But the world they built, that's the one we still live in. Where debt is invisible and interest runs the world like oxygen. Hey, welcome to the history of debt, where we uncover the hidden stories of money, faith, and power. Because what if the world's biggest financial revolution was born inside the church that tried to stop it? Long before Wall Street, before the dollar, before even the word bank, there was usury. A word that meant more than greed, it meant moral decay. To lend money and demand more in return was considered theft from God himself. The Bible warned against it. Do not charge your brother interest. The Quran echoed it. God has permitted trade, but forbidden usury. To the medieval mind, profit from time was blasphemy. Because time was divine, and only God could make something grow from nothing. So Europe built an economy without time. Merchants could trade goods, farmers could barter, but money had to remain still. A coin was supposed to be sterile, pure, unchanging. To make it reproduce was to corrupt it. And so, across Christendom, moral fear kept the economy on a leash. Priests thundered against usurers from the pulpits. Painters showed them burning in hell, devoured by demons with coin-shaped eyes. Even kings feared the label. To be called a usurer was worse than being called a thief. Yet the world was changing. Trade routes stretched from Venice to Cairo. Ships left Genoa with cargo worth fortunes. And merchants needed credit, something faster than prayer. Quietly, they began to bend the rules. A loan wasn't a loan, it was a gift. Repayment wasn't interest, it was gratitude. And as commerce expanded, morality began to creak under the weight of reality. In hidden back rooms and candlelit cellars, men began writing coded contracts. Phrases like mutuum or contractus trinus. Latin disguises for profit. The church condemned them, but it couldn't stop them. Because even bishops needed bridges, armies, and cathedrals, and all of it cost gold. Europe was trying to build a world on faith, but it was running on credit. The irony is almost biblical. The same church that damned usury started to depend on it. At first, the tricks were simple. A merchant might sell his goods in one city, then buy them back in another for a slightly different price. The difference wasn't interest, at least, not officially. It was risk, or service, or transportation. In truth, it was a loophole, the first spark of modern finance. Letters of exchange soon followed slips of parchment that let traders move money without moving gold. A merchant in London could pay a banker in Florence, and his partner in Rome could collect the equivalent sum minus a small fee. A miracle of convenience, a sin in disguise. And then came indulgences, spiritual payments for the remission of sin. Coins traded for salvation. The church told the faithful that money could buy forgiveness, and the faithful listened. In its own way, the church had monetized guilt. Profit cloaked in piety. But the real transformation began in Florence. There, a handful of merchant families, the Bardi, the Peruzzi, and most famously, the Medici, learned how to make the moral system itself work for them. The Medici didn't lend money, at least not directly. They managed deposits. They took in gold from pilgrims and princes, then invested it on their behalf. The profits weren't interest, they were returns from partnership. This semantic dance kept them safe from the wrath of theologians, while filling their ledgers with unimaginable wealth. Soon, the Medici weren't just bankers, they were kingmakers. Their clients included merchants, monarchs, and even popes. One of them, Giovanni di Bici de' Medici, financed the election of Pope John XXIII. His son Cosimo became the richest man in Europe. And his grandson Lorenzo, the Magnificent, turned Florence into the beating heart of the Renaissance. It was faith that gave them cover. Because while priests banned profit from lending, bishops borrowed secretly to fund their cathedrals. And so, hypocrisy became infrastructure. Every sermon against greed made the loophole stronger. Every denunciation of usury made the banker's hand more careful, more creative, more essential. Europe had found a way to moralize money, and the Church, despite its warnings, was now one of the largest borrowers in Christendom. The forbidden system had become indispensable. By the 15th century, the Medici had turned moral loopholes into architecture. They built networks of branches across Europe, London, Bruges, Venice, Rome, connected not by roads, but by paper. If you held a Medici letter of credit, you could travel from England to Constantinople and never touch a coin. It was safer, faster, and blessed by the Church. The secret? Trust. Not divine trust, financial trust. The belief that a number on a page could stand in for gold. Every ledger, every signature, every seal became part of a new invisible machine. The Medici called it accounting. We call it banking. The Church had once said that time belonged to God. Now time had a price, and interest, the old forbidden fruit, was baked into every transaction, just hidden under layers of moral language. When the Pope needed to fund a crusade, he borrowed from the bankers he once condemned. When kings fought wars, they borrowed too, pawning their kingdoms to families who never lifted a sword. Finance became the silent empire behind every crown. And it all began with a ban. What started as sin had become a system once so elegant that it outlived its creators. The Medici Bank eventually collapsed, but their methods survived. Letters of credit became checks. Deposits became savings. And interest, once a whisper, became the heartbeat of global finance. What began in Florence now defines Wall Street, because every mortgage, every student loan, every line of credit traces its ancestry back to those candle-lit ledgers. We live in a world that monetizes time, because 500 years ago, the Church tried to outlaw it. And in that irony lies the origin of modern power. The 16th century brought rebellion. Martin Luther nailed his theses to a church door, not just against indulgences, but against a system that sold salvation for coin. The Reformation tore Europe in half, and with it came a new morality. John Calvin, a Protestant reformer, reframed the question entirely. He argued that interest, in moderation, wasn't evil. What mattered was intention. If lending helped build society, if it rewarded hard work and discipline, then perhaps it wasn't sin at all. That small shift changed everything. For the first time, profit could be moral. Wealth could be a sign of divine favor. And success could be proof of virtue. This became the backbone of a new faith capitalism. The idea that prosperity was evidence of purpose, that money could measure goodness. It was a comforting myth, one that made the modern economy not only possible, but righteous. Over time, the moral story flipped. The usurer became the entrepreneur, the banker became the builder, and interest, once a whisper of corruption, became a symbol of trust. But the contradiction never disappeared. Because if the Church once called interest evil, why does your credit score depend on it? Why does morality now favor those who profit from debt, while condemning those trapped inside it? The system that began as a loophole has become the law of the land. And in the United States, the child of European finance, the faith has evolved into data, algorithms, and quarterly returns. A digital religion where profit is proof of progress. Yet, underneath it all, the same question lingers, the one the monks whispered centuries ago. Can money grow without sin? For centuries, The church tried to protect the soul from profit. It built walls around morality strict, shining, immovable. But people found the cracks. Merchants disguised loans as gifts. Popes borrowed from the families they condemned. And slowly, brick by brick, the walls turned into bridges, connecting faith, power, and money into a single system. They didn't mean to invent modern banking. They meant to stop greed. But in trying to contain it, they gave it structure rules, language, and legitimacy. And that's the quiet tragedy of history. Every moral code eventually builds the machine it fears most. The church's ban on interest was supposed to protect humanity from temptation. Instead, it taught us how to quantify it, to package it, regulate it, and call it good business. Today, the old cathedrals stand silent, their bells replaced by the hum of stock exchanges. Gold has become numbers on screens. And faith once measured in prayer now lives in credit ratings and market forecasts. But if you listen closely, you can still hear the echo of the original sin. The desire to make time itself pay interest. The medieval priest would call it blasphemy. The modern banker calls it innovation. And somewhere in between, our civilization found its soul, or lost it. Because maybe the question isn't whether profit is evil, but whether a world built entirely on borrowed time can ever be free. So, next time you check your bank balance, remember, behind every digit lies 1,000 years of moral debate from the candlelit vaults of Florence to the glass towers of Manhattan. They tried to protect the soul from profit, but in doing so, they built a world that worships it. If this changed the way you see history, don't just scroll away. Think, question, subscribe. Because here, at the History of Debt, we don't just retell history, we reveal the system still ruling your life.